Mike Rotunda never screamed, never cut wild promos, never worked stiff. He just showed up, wrestled like a tax audit in human form, and left without a scratch. But under that accountant face and all-American jaw was a guy who hated bullshit, especially the kind that came wrapped in tassels, powder, or ego. From Syracuse standout to varsity club drill sergeant, from IRS and the WWF to NWO background noise in WCW, Rotunda played the long game. The problem was, he had to share locker rooms with short-tempered clowns who treated every match like it was their own personal highlight reel. He didn't cut shoot interviews, he didn't do podcasts, but the guys he couldn't stand, you could see it in every cold stare, every flat-back bump he refused to take. Here are 5 guys Mike Rotunda quietly despised and never forgave. Back in the WWF mid-80s, Rotunda was grinding out real tag team wrestling with Barry Windham. They were the US Express, tight trunks, tighter work rate, pure Americana. Then, across the ring came this oily parody of a hairdresser with abs, Brutus Beefcake. It was like watching a YMCA Zumba instructor try to work Memphis chain wrestling. Rotunda couldn't stand him. He thought Beefcake was all gimmick, no grit. And that wasn't just a vibe, it was gospel. The guy showed up in tassels, blue kisses, and couldn't chain wrestle his way out of a shoelace. Rotunda once said in a locker room rant, "You could replace him with a poodle in a leather vest and get more ring psychology." What made it worse? Beefcake had that Hogan pass, the push, the protection, the politicking. While Rotunda was trying to perfect the wrist lock, Beefcake was getting main events for surviving barbershop window skits. And backstage? Forget it. Rotunda kept things quiet, regimented, business first. Beefcake, meanwhile, rolled in like an AC/DC groupie, spray-tanned, overhyped, and bragging about matches he hadn't even bumped in. One time he asked Rotunda, dead serious, "You ever think about adding, like, glitter to your IRS tie?" Their heat wasn't fireworks. It was low, bitter static. No brawls, no broken jaws, just pure locker room detest. Rotunda refused to work with him after a couple house shows in '85. He thought Beefcake represented everything wrong with the '80s boom: style over substance, tan over talent, and gimmick over grit. Brutus might have been protected by the Hogan bubble, but to Rotunda, he was a clown in a hairdryer suit. And when he finally left the WWF, Rotunda didn't say goodbye, he just crossed the name off a mental list and kept lacing his boots. Mike Rotunda didn't hate showboats, he hated empty ones. Lex was all upper body, zero upper floor. By the late '80s, their paths crossed backstage in both WWF and early NWA spots, and the temperature between them was already Arctic. One guy ran drills like it was the NFL Combine. The other guy actually thought posing was cardio. Rotunda viewed Lex like a gym selfie that somehow got a contract. He was lazy, he once told a friend, and he knew it. The way Lex floated through matches while clinging to his tan like it was psychology had Rotunda counting to 10. For real. He wasn't the type to scream at you. He'd just lean in during a headlock and quietly ask, "You plan on wrestling tonight or just glistening?" The heat was old school. No shouting, no fights. Just quiet, seething contempt. Rotunda never went into business for himself. He just made sure Lex felt every takedown. Lex, meanwhile, thought Rotunda was boring. Not wrong. Just ironic coming from the human barbell curl. Mike refused to ride with him, called him a mirror hog. One WCW road agent remembered Rotunda saying, "If I have to listen to that guy practice his abs in the mirror again, I'm going to stretch him into an origami swan." Luger thought he was the man. Mike thought he was a walking self-portrait. Their heat was quiet but venomous, the kind where one guy does just enough to keep the peace and the other never gets over not being respected by someone who'd seen real workers. They just never gelled, and it showed on screen. To Rotunda, Lex was everything that turned the business into a gym poster. Flashy, loud, and hollow, a walking push with no soul under the tan. To Lex, Rotunda was just a bitter relic in pleated pants, treating wrist locks like they were sacred scrolls. They didn't need to yell. They weren't just ships passing in the night. They were oil and vinegar in a shaker that never got used. And even that paint would have popped more than either of their reactions to each other. Mike Rotunda never hated Satan. He hated working with the guy who pretended to be him. Kevin Sullivan was a loud, coked-up menace with a booking pen in one hand and a voodoo gimmick in the other. To Rotunda, Sullivan was what happened when a Florida Territory fantasy turned into a televised group therapy session. Rotunda didn't believe in devils, demons, or pushing yourself on top with a devil stick and a walkie-talkie. Their relationship was simple. Sullivan brought him into the varsity club, then micromanaged him like a paranoid boss with adult ADHD. Mike hated the constant rewrites, hated the promos about spiritual energy and the games they play. And he really hated the way Sullivan kept booking himself into angles he couldn't physically survive without backup. Rotunda would roll his eyes so hard backstage it looked like he was trying to read his own thoughts. When Sullivan barked orders, Mike just stared, arms folded, counting the minutes, till this leprechaun burned out. He didn't respect his work. He didn't respect his body. He didn't respect the fact that Sullivan would book 4 angles before lunch, all involving himself, Nancy, and some poor bastard getting tied up with a chain. And when Mike brought it up, Sullivan called him too quiet for the business. Too quiet? Rotunda was busy wrestling actual matches while Sullivan was rubbing face paint on his chest like a midlife breakdown. The final straw came in WCW when Sullivan pitched an angle where Mike would lose his mind and join a cult. Mike shut it down instantly. I don't do cults, I do wrist locks. From that point on, they barely spoke unless forced to. According to one agent, Rotunda told WCW brass, let him book himself into a coma, just keep him away from me. There was no blow-up, no blood. Just complete dead air between them, even while teaming. Rotunda hit his suplexes, walked off, and left Sullivan to talk to the turnbuckles. Sullivan wanted chaos, Mike wanted competence. One played the devil, the other wanted to strangle him with the gimmick robe. And honestly, he almost did. Mike Rotunda hated unprofessionalism. Dan Spivey hated clocks, cardio, and coherent sentences. When WWF tried to rekindle the US Express magic with Spivey as a bootleg Barry Windham, it was like watching someone try to remake Top Gun using stock footage and cough syrup. Rotunda showed up like a soldier. Spivey showed up like a migraine in boots. The heat didn't explode. It simmered. Quiet at first. But then Spivey started missing meetings, slurring in promos, getting lost mid-match and tagging in when no one was legal. Rotunda wasn't just annoyed, he was embarrassed. He told agents, if this guy tags me in upside down again, I'm walking to the back. Spivey came from the Hogan orbit, jacked, juiced, and about as ring-savvy as a thrown sandal. He bumped like he was being mugged and sold like he was trying to remember where he left his car. Rotunda didn't drink, didn't use, didn't screw around. Spivey ticked all 3 boxes. One house show loop in 1986, Rotunda sat in the locker room fully dressed, waiting. Spivey showed up 12 minutes before bell time, drenched in sweat from something that definitely wasn't a warm-up, reeking like a bong and a tanning bed had a baby. Rotunda looked him up and down and said, "You good?" Spivey winked and said, "Better than ever, baby." Mike never forgave him. They never meshed. Rotunda worked tight, precise. Spivey worked like a baby deer with nerve damage. Mike hated tagging with him because it wasn't just sloppy, it made him look like he didn't care. And if there's one thing Rotunda didn't tolerate, it was being made to look like a clown because someone else was chasing butterflies in their own brain fog. After the team died, they barely spoke again. Spivey spiraled into Waylon Mercy. Rotunda sharpened IRS into a workhorse heel, but the heat stuck. Years later, when a producer floated Spivey's name for a backstage segment cameo, Rotunda supposedly muttered, "If he shows up lucid, I'll be shocked." There was no reunion, just an open tab of resentment and a tag partner Mike Rotunda wished he could audit right into rehab. Mike Rotunda hated ego. Steve Williams hated being questioned. So what happens when 2 legit college wrestling alphas get booked in the same stable? Varsity Club, 1988. Dusty's idea of a faction built on real wrestlers turned into a cold war of mat resumes, with Rotunda and Dr. Death playing the who's more legit game like it was a shoot tournament, and no one was allowed to blink. It started polite, Syracuse versus Oklahoma, 2 tough guys who could go. But the second Williams started puffing out his chest and politicking backstage, Rotunda saw through him like a bad amateur scout tape. Williams wanted to be the leader. Rotunda was the leader. And while Kevin Sullivan was off, chanting to the ceiling tiles, these 2 were quietly sandbagging each other into grudges. Rotunda hated how Williams no-sold critiques, stiffed green guys, and walked around like he was owed push just for being scary in Japan. There was a story on the 1989 loop where Williams blew a finish, blamed the ref, and Mike just stared at him like he was watching a gorilla try to play chess with boxing gloves. They didn't talk. They didn't ride together. They didn't even acknowledge each other unless Sullivan forced it in a promo. And when they locked up, it got real, fast. Williams would add that extra torque on a suplex, and Rotunda would chop him across the windpipe like he was trying to sign a quit notice on his trachea. Backstage, It was ice cold. One WCW producer overheard Rotunda mutter, "He hits like he's trying to win an award. I wrestle like I've already earned one." By the time the varsity club fell apart, they were communicating exclusively in stiff elbows and hostile eye contact. Rotunda later said he'd rather run wind sprints in dress shoes than team with Williams again. That wasn't shade. That was a full burial under the mats. 2 legit guys, 0 trust. And enough quiet hate to fill an entire amateur bracket with broken noses and bruised egos. He didn't throw tantrums. He didn't play politics. He just waited. And when the time came, he left you hanging on a blind tag and let the crowd figure out who stunk up the ring. That was Rotunda. Cold, calculating, and quietly disgusted by half the locker room. He didn't need a catchphrase. His revenge was survival. And if you got the cold shoulder, that was the receipt. No yelling, no warning, just ice. If that hit, subscribe. If it burned, like it. Either way, Rotunda outlasted them. That's the real finish. Thanks for watching.